Hey everyone, it's Dr. K. So, strength training is good for your overall health and wellness, but a lack of time is a serious barrier for many individuals. And I want to show you how strength training can be carried out efficiently by looking at your different variables like your rest time, the need for a warm-up or your stretch, which movements to prioritize, how often to do them, what loading ranges you should be working at, and playing with things like supersets and drop sets. These are all influential variables that can have your training time while maintaining your training volume. So first of all, we should be prioritizing bilateral multi-joint exercises that are full and dynamic. Basically, the exercise covers or crosses multiple joints and targets several groups of muscles at the same time versus just an individual muscle. This promotes using groups of muscles to lift heavier amounts of weight. So think of things like overhead pressing versus a bicep curl. This also stresses the muscles in eccentric and concentric action, so there's a greater amount of muscle mass trained, which allows for a shorter session. Second thing you can look at is perform, one leg press type exercise, that'd be something like a squat, and then one upper body pull type exercise, like a band pull or a pull-up. Then one body push exercise, that'd be something like a bench press or a push-up. Another thing to look at is whether or not any active warm-up is needed. And active warm-up should be specific to the exercise you're programming that day. And when you talk about stretching, I would only prioritize stretching if the goal is to increase flexibility short-term, or maybe make it feel good or desensitized as part of your recovery plan. There's a whole other post on static stretching I'm prepping right now that you should take a look at for more relevant suggestions. The short answer is warm-up is often recommended at the start of your training session to prepare your body for the work to be done, and specific warm-ups can have a real beneficial effect on strength and power. So it means you should be doing those even if time is really short on your part. You want to maximize the amount of work you're capable of doing, which means you need that active warm-up. So regarding frequency, there's research out there that suggests strength gains come from low training frequency, something like 1 day a week, just as easily as 2 or 3 days a week or 3 or more days a week per muscle group. That means there's a negligible increase in strength gains from a higher frequency of training. So what that means is you can achieve similar training effects by training a muscle group once a week compared to a higher frequency, as long as the total volume is equal. And that's really the key. When training volume was matched, we're talking about the same sets and reps or the same sets and reps times load, there wasn't any significant effective training frequency for strength gains. That means a person who basically trained a muscle group 1 day per week using the same totals as someone who did it over 3 times a week had the same effect, as long as the training volume was the same. Now, I'm not saying you have to train once a week, because there's no quick fix to anything, but what I'm saying is if you're in a pinch on your scheduling and your workload is burdening you and your timing is off because of your personal life, then that's the way to go. That's the mentality you need to have, is think about that total volume until you can get back into a higher frequency training schedule. That way, you can still get those greater gains. You're still going to have the, preferable outcomes in terms of maximizing your strength gains. Now, the most important variable in strength training is going to be your percentage of your 1 rep max. That's going to affect your training loads being heavier or maybe moderate or low, and that will affect things like whether or not you increase your maximum strength, hypertrophy or size, or muscular endurance. So for the context of us being time efficient, we're thinking about training with a heavier load because it's preferable, because you can only lift it for a few amount of reps, which means less time actually training. Now, let's talk about rest, because that's a variable that can optimize the gains for strength and hypertrophy and endurance, etc. But basically it allows the body to remove waste and replenish for the next set. So if we're have insufficient rest, we basically have a reduced workload. Now, depending on your goal, there are different guidelines for how long you should rest in between sets, But there was a recent systematic review that found shorter rest periods of less than a minute produced a huge increase in strength gains. So in a pinch, the average shows that 1 to 2 minutes of rest in between your sets is probably the sweet spot if you need it, but absolutely no longer than 2 minutes. Now, last, you should be looking at doing something like a superset, which basically limits the time spent at rest. So it allows you to have a greater amount of training volume in a shorter period of time. So for a superset, what you do is you pair exercises together. So from a time efficient standpoint, we would pair exercises from different muscle groups. And what a person would do is they would do exercise A and then immediately go into exercise B with no rest in between. And then after exercise B, they would rest for a short period of time and then start a new set of A and B again. And they would work through their programming that way for the day. Now, training under a superset has shown similar improvements and strength gains compared to traditional training, with roughly half of the training time compared to a traditional training group. Now, a drop set will really reduce your training time by minimizing the rest between sets, so that you're actually going to perform a traditional set of an exercise, like exercise A, then you reduce the load, how much weight you're moving around, then you immediately perform another set of the same exercise with a reduction in weight. So all your sets are basically performed back to back to back to back to muscular failure with a reduced load. Now, compare that to a traditional set where you would do exercise A, then you would rest, exercise A and rest, exercise A and rest, and then switch to a new exercise. You can see how time efficient it can be to kind of play around with those variables. I hope this was insightful for you and gave you some ideas on how you can maintain all the progress you made while you're working through a challenging time with your scheduling. But it also gives you other ideas, other variables that you can use in your programming when you do have your normal schedule, so that you can really maximize your gains in the gym. If there's anything I can help you with or anything I missed you want to discuss, feel free to reach out to me. I'm celebrating your success already. Stay strong, inspire others.